Please welcome Dr. Beverly Dana Tatum. I wonder if you could start by telling us, are the black kids still sitting together in the cafeteria?
I have been traveling a lot talking about the book, and people often ask me what's different, like what's changed, how have things changed in the last 20 years. What I've been saying about the book has changed, not because the book has changed, but our context has changed, and I've been thinking a little bit more about it, and now I have what I call the 3 Ps. The first P is population, right? The population's changed quite a bit. The demographics of the nation are changing rapidly, and I just celebrated a birthday. I was born in 1954. In 1954, the US population was 90% white. Today, if you look at that pie chart, it's about 2/3 white, 66%, 66, 67% white, and the rest, 18% Latinx, 13% African American, approximately 6% Asian. Even though 6% is a small percentage, that's actually the fastest growing portion of the population, largely through immigration, primarily from China. About 1%, maybe somewhere between 1 and 2% native. We see that population shift is significant, and what I just described is the adult population. If we were talking about school-age population, we would be talking about a population that is already 50% or slightly more kids of color. And then there is the second P. And the second P is politics. I want to talk about 4 presidents. We've had 4 presidents in the last 20 years. And in 1997, Bill Clinton was the president. And I remember something that happened in 1997 when my book first came out. It was maybe November of the book came out in September, and in November of 1997, I came home. My husband said the White House called. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, I'm not kidding. The White House called, and President Clinton is having a town hall on race in Akron, Ohio, and they want to invite you to come. He's read your book. They want to invite you to come. It was very exciting, as you might imagine. And so off I went to Akron, Ohio, and that event took place in early December. And it was President Clinton on the stage talking about launching his President's Initiative on Race. And he talked about why it was necessary and why this was a good time to have a conversation about race. Clearly he talked about the lingering legacy of racism in our society, the importance of addressing this issue. But he said, now is the time for us to do this, because in 1997, we were not at war with anyone. We were a nation at peace, he said, and the economy was strong. And he said, and so this is a good time. People are feeling good. People are feeling optimistic about the economy. We're a nation at peace. This is the time we should take up this hard conversation. Fast forward to the next president. Year 2000, it's George W. Bush. And in 2001, 9/11 happened. And then we were not a nation at peace. And the economy, somewhere between 2001 and 2008, the end of his tenure, the economy tanked. Not that George Bush was trying to lead a conversation about race, but even if he wanted to, the circumstances that Bill Clinton said were necessary were no longer in place. And then, after George W. in 2008, of course, we elected Barack Obama. And on the one hand, many people saw the election of the first black president of the United States to be a sign of progress. It was also described as a sign we don't have to talk about race, right? Now we're in a post-racial society. We don't have to think about that. So when I talk about that P, that politics, one of the things I like to say about it is that leadership matters, right? And I say leadership matters not just to say it matters who's the president, but leadership matters when I'm talking to teachers, and I know I'm talking to some educators in the room. When I'm talking to classroom teachers, your leadership matters in the classroom. Your leadership matters as the principal. Your leadership matters as a superintendent. Your leadership matters in your office. Your leadership, everyone has a sphere of influence. We all have leadership that we exercise, people we influence. And it matters whether we are speaking in an inclusive way, bringing people together, or speaking in an us-them kind of way, which unfortunately is most of what we're hearing right about now. Which brings me to the third P, and the third P is polarization.
Could you speak about allied behavior for us for a moment?
I get this question a lot, particularly from students. I spend a lot of my time speaking on college and university campuses. Let me back up by saying there's a very interesting statistic that I have in my book, in the prologue, which is about social networks. There was a survey done of the American population, broadly speaking, to determine how people spend their time and with whom. And the results of this survey showed that 75% of white adults have entirely white social networks, meaning no friends of color, very little interaction with people of color in their daily lives. One of the things that seems most important about becoming a powerful ally is to expand one's social network and also to educate oneself, right? So if I have limited sources of information, how can I get more? Certainly reading, coming to events like this, those kinds of things are certainly important. And then there's the opportunity to expand one's network. And so you might say, well, how do I do that? I can't just, grab people on the street and say, will you be my friend? Will you be my neighbor? But in fact, finding organizations where you're likely to encounter people whose experiences are different from your own. That could be, I know Andrea's become actively involved in a church in Springfield, a predominantly black church in Springfield. That's a strategy. I belong to a church in Atlanta, which is where I now live, and it is a historically black congregation founded in 1867, but there are a few white members, and those white members know people of color, right? But there are other ways to do that too, thinking about organizations that are involved in communities. Again, I'm thinking about Atlanta, but I can only imagine there would be similar kinds of things in Holyoke or Springfield, and to the extent that there are segments of the Northampton population. It's not the most diverse place, but getting more so. But certainly Holyoke and Springfield are good examples of opportunities where one can be volunteering, get engaged in schools, lots of different ways through community service to connect with people in an authentic way. If you have limited experience and you're doing all those things and you're developing relationships, in the course of developing those relationships, there can be challenging moments. I recently read a book which is coming out to be published by Beacon Press. The title of it was called Some of My Friends Are. The author's name is Deborah Plummer, and it's about cross-racial friendships. And one of the things that she talks about is that sometimes people form cross-racial relationships and they manage them by never talking about the hard stuff. Let's go to the movies together, let's do things together, but, don't talk to me about race or class or other kinds of hard things. But having those hard conversations is what makes those relationships really authentic. But I also think that it's important to say that there are places where white people gather amongst themselves. I think of SORRELL, which stands for Standing Up for Racial Justice. There are chapters all over the country. And the benefit, some people might say, well, how will that help me? The benefit of that is the opportunity to connect with other white people who are working on these issues and to have the kind of scaffolding that occurs. If I'm just a beginner and there's someone who's been doing it longer than me, I can learn from that person's example. And that learning can happen without always relying on the people of color to be the educators. I recently spoke at an institution which shall remain nameless, but while I was speaking there, someone said, we've been talking about having affinity groups and creating these opportunities for white students to really learn how to be better allies in whites-only spaces. And, I've read your book and I know you think that can be valuable. But sometimes the students of color express concern that if they're not in the room, how will they know if it's being done well? And I said, well, I know that students of color also say that they are tired of always having to be the teachers.
That's right.
So I said, so you can't have it both ways. right? You know, you can either be in the room, be the teacher, or you have to, you know, relinquish that to somebody else and hope that it goes okay. But this is simply to say that that self-education is really important.
I think allied behavior is about helping you and your friend, white people I'm talking to you and your friends and your family and your kids and your everybody to break through the denial. Maybe I'm not looking at people in this room who deny their racism, white people, but a lot of your friends and colleagues and family members do, and we have to be agents for change all the time. What I would say is that we have to keep paying attention. Those are the key words. I used to have a poster in my office at Mount Holyoke College when we were at Mount Holyoke together as deans, and it said, keep paying attention, and it's for white people. Keep paying attention. We will get anesthetized. We will get lured into not noticing. We will think things have gotten better. We will believe post-racial junk. And we have to keep speaking out, being unpopular, being brave, and keep paying attention. I think that it's very, very important that we be role models, that we be brave, that we not be silenced, that we have hard conversations, that we dare to say the wrong things, that we believe we will be forgiven. It is better to talk about race and do slightly badly than totally avoid it and never broach the conversation. Be aware and be courageous to go into hard places. Last thing I'll say is, Bev and I were at the citywide Springfield revival last night, and it was at AIC in a big auditorium, and it was 4 churches came together, and it was a big deal. I was there Wednesday night too. The auditorium at AIC is full, and it's full of people of color. The stage is full of African American choirs. The seats are full of African American pastors. I serve the Alden Baptist Church. So I'm up front because I'm one of the pastors at the church. So I'm up front, and I'm on a stage that has only people of color except for Dominic Sarno. So me and Dominic Sarno are the only white people probably in the room. That was Wednesday night. Thursday, my sister calls me. She lives in Northampton. She's married to an African American woman. She calls and says, Andrea, did you see the news? I said, no. What news? She said, you were on 22 last night. I said, oh, I was? She said, yeah, you better Google it and look, you're not going to like it. I thought that she meant that I had a bad outfit or something like that. That's what I thought. I Googled it. I saw 22. There's a room full of African American people, and the camera rests on my face. Because of institutional racism, they picked out and watched a white woman. I never saw the camera. I didn't even know they were there. They must have a Zoom lens. What do I know? I didn't see them. I never talked to them. I had nothing to do with them. I didn't know they were in the house. But the camera focuses on me on the stage because of institutional racism. So I'm clapping and I'm looking at the choir and everything, and I cringed. So I have a call to Channel 22 or a letter in my future. I have to. And say, folks, don't do that again. Don't feature the white person at a gathering that is mainly of color. You probably have done that before. Please don't do that again. Do you see? I mean, any step, any moment, any interaction, any intervention, any standing up to racism matters. These conversations that Dr. Tatum is talking about that we must have, white people, you gotta have them. I will tell you right now, you will do badly, do it anyway. Do it anyway. Racism is too old, too pervasive, and we've learned our racism too well to get it right every time. Talk about it anyway. Do badly anyway. Do it.
We have to go beyond ally work to collaborative work. Yes. When I was at the march in Washington, I ran across, sometimes these random encounters are profound. There was such intersectionality at that march. I had all kinds of stuff about being a lesbian and marriage equality and different things. I ran into this young African-American woman from Louisiana. She was affiliated with an evangelical church, and she came right up to me and she said, how can I teach my people to not be homophobic? And I said, why don't you talk to me about racism as well? Let's have a conversation. And what can we each do? We spent an hour and a half together, and it completely influenced everything that I do.
That is a great story, and it reminds me of something that I have been talking about of late, and that is what I'm going to call the empathy gap. In April of 2018, we were marking the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I was asked to serve on a panel in Memphis, and so I was on this panel for a program that was, the theme of the program was, where do we go from here? And that theme was taken from the title of Dr. King's last book, right? So the last book he wrote was published in 1968, and that's the title, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? You will discover, as I did, that it sounds like he was describing 2018. You know, one of the things he says is that the line of progress is never straight. That there's always pushback. Whenever there's social progress, there's always pushback against it, and that, you know, a period of retraction. And I certainly see that we're in a period of retraction right now. But the other thing he said is that, you know, you can change laws, but changing, you know, and at that time, you know, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had been passed. He said, you know, you can change laws, you can have policies, but that doesn't necessarily change the attitudes that people have. And he talked about, you know, the fear, the pride, the irrationality, and that only comes through the creation of genuine empathy. And that, you know, it's genuine empathy that leads people to take action.
We often would say in workshops, you didn't start the fire. You know, white people grew up marinated just in racism. That we've often used the poker game analogy. White people were born, and as little babies were put at a poker table and were given a good hand. They had nothing that they did made us take a good hand. So I took a really good hand off the table as a child. Guilt is not productive, and the distinction that I make with other white collaborators is that guilt doesn't help, but fully understanding that you don't need to carry around a lot of guilt. We don't need to, but we are fully responsible. That we're not guilty for what we learned as kids. We really marinated in a racist culture. So we absorbed it, and we learned it, and we spewed it, and we know it. And privileges was made to be invisible to us, but we're fully responsible. When you're talking to adults, these are fully responsible adults. And we need to be breaking the cycle of oppression with all we do and say and teach. And I'm also thinking about the 3 Fs. And our teaching around felt, found, feel, because that helps a little bit here. Bev and I would often talk to people about felt, found, feel, which is a way to interrupt any of the isms, Islamophobia or heterosexism or ageism or classism or racism. And felt, found, feel sounds very...
You say that slower.
Yes. It's the 3 Fs. Do you want to talk about that? The 3 Fs are felt, found, and feel. And Bev and I like this one a lot because you can relate to anybody. If somebody says a homophobic comment, or Islamophobic comment, or transphobic comment, or a racist comment, you, if you're in the dominant culture, have probably felt and thought that. You absorb the same junk they did if you're in the dominant group. So if you're not trans, you have that stuff. If you're white, you have racist junk. So you can say, I have felt as you feel, and it's genuine. I can say that. I don't feel that way now, but I have felt as you feel. I made those jokes. I was the life of the party saying some of that stuff. I get it. So you relate to somebody's junk. You relate to somebody's homophobia or racism, and then you say, I found out, felt found. I found out this about trans people, or this about Muslims, or this about people of color. I now do this in communities of color. You give new information that changes minds. And I now feel called to make a difference, to step forward, to say in conversations like this that I don't agree with that anymore. We can agree to disagree, and I'm not here to persuade or convince you, but I have found different information and I feel totally differently now.
I only want to add one thing, which is sometimes someone says something that you really never felt. In which, that you can't authentically say, I felt that way, or, you know. So, but there's a slight variation which helps in that situation, which is to say something like, I know many people feel that way.
Recently, during Hurricane Maria, a group of Puerto Rican women got together to put together a march. And half of this room, all of you could have been there to support women of color. Because the other dynamic that happens is that we tend to think that the only people that are doing the work are connected to an organization. There's people on the ground doing grassroots organizing that need to be supported as well. The only folks, not the only, it was actually pretty incredible, but we commemorated a march that happened in 1981 when a mother and her 3 children died in a fire. Because if people know the history of Holyoke, it's always been known as Paper City or Arson City. So those were fires for hire. It was part of the city's agenda to move Puerto Ricans out of this neighborhood to create another yet not successful industrial park. So I'm the people's historian of the Puerto Rican diaspora here in Holyoke. And when we did that march, it was posted on Facebook. Very few of you, with all due respect, very few of you were here. So I also want to add, I don't need an ally. I need a co-conspirator. Yeah. Someone who's going to stand by me hand by hand and produce. And what you all have that I don't have is access. Access to scholarship, access to funding, access to people. Right? So how do we do that? Again, with all due respect, some of you have been my allies, and I see Renee, hi, that I recognize, but I don't need another ally. I need a co-conspirator, someone who's going to stand side by side, because what I believe helped the civil rights movement, it was white and black folks together, held in arms, ready to go across Selma. It wasn't white folks riding down, coming to communities when Dr. Tatum is here. It's white folks sitting at the table, also being able to step back and allow black and brown leadership to be in control of their neighborhoods. Because there's a quote that I love. Those who are closest to the problem have the solution. Let us create the solutions for our community.
I want to say to the white people and to myself that one of the things that I think is important for people in the dominant culture and for whites tackling and working on race issues, as we all should be, is what I call the principle of show up and shut up. Just show up and then don't lead and don't be out front, because our socialization for dominance, people like me, dominant in so many areas, is to take over, to lead, to finish the sentence, to have the answer. It's a hard ongoing lesson for people like me, but the show up and shut up is helping me. Thank you very much.
One of the things that I think it's really important for us to all get beyond in some ways, though it's hard to do, is the emotional reactivity associated with the R word, right? You know, it's like, I remember having a conversation with a teacher a long time ago, a white teacher, who said, you know, we were talking about her reluctance to give honest feedback to the black children in her largely white classroom. And her reluctance was rooted in her fear that a parent might say she was singling the kid out for criticism and that she might be called racist by the parent. And I said, well, what would that, so let's imagine that happened. Let's imagine a parent said you were racist. What would that mean to you? She said, I would feel like I've been punched in the stomach. You know, like I was being told I was like scum of the earth. You know, just, it would be just so painful for me. And then, of course, we talked about the inequality of not giving honest feedback. That, in fact, it is racist if you don't. But anyway, but besides that, you know, just this notion, but if we understand that it's very difficult not to be racist, how could you avoid being racist? You know, if the white supremacist ideology that is, you know, if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it, Stamped from the Beginning. That's the title of it, Stand from the Beginning. And it's about the way in which the idea of white supremacy is sort of baked into American society. And if you grow up in the United States, you know, it's stamped into your view of the world, whether you're a person of color or white. I mean, people of color, of course, have some buffers that can come from experience and parents, etc. But we're all exposed to misinformation and the smog of racism in our society. It's just a question of degrees.
Targeted people already know a lot about the dominant group. So people of color know a lot about whites because whites are dominant. Women know a lot about men. People in the LGBTQ community know a lot about heterosexuals. You know a lot about Christians in America because it's the dominant group. So I often wonder about what is the benefit to the targeted group of exchanges where the targeted group already knows a lot about and has already had to converse and live in a world with dominance having all the advantages, the advantages, and the privileges. So I just am aware that we have to make sure that our learning opportunities are mutual and equal. And I'm thinking about the fact that I was the, Ned referred to it a minute ago, I was pastor of a church in Hampshire County for 12 years. And when I left that church, I left that church 2 years ago and I started worshiping in Springfield and Holyoke and eventually ended up at the Alden Baptist Church and then was asked actually to be on the ministerial team. So I'm actually an associate pastor at Alden. And when word traveled to Hampshire County that I, who live in Hampshire County, was serving a church in Springfield, a lot, in fact 4 houses of worship in Hampshire County all asked me if they could partner with Alden. And I couldn't figure out what the benefit was to Alden. What I said was, you can't do a drive-by worship tourism. You can't do that. You can't. I'm trying to figure out what the benefit is to Alden for you to partner with us. Because people expected me to say, great, I don't want to use any of the names of the house of worship. And I met with one white woman pastor, and she said, you're not enthusiastic about this. I said, look, I can go back to the senior pastor and ask him if this is a good idea, but I'm trying to figure out what the benefit is to Alden. And she said, what would you suggest we do? And I said, spend a year working on race issues and then come back to us. Work on it, preach on it, read on it, change your music, change your Sunday school curriculum, have a million events, do something. It was not so long ago that almost all-male board in Northampton asked me to come and talk about diversifying the board and adding more women. And I thought, this is going to be a hard workshop, and I'm not sure successful, and I can't see what the benefit is to me. I mean, this sounds, targeted people, whatever area we're targeted, get weary. And I'm only targeted by my gender, by being identified as a woman. That's the only area in the forms of systematic oppression where I'm targeted. I'm dominant in every other way. So I have a lot of privilege every single moment and every place I enter. But I did think, I don't know if I want to help your board diversify. This sounds tedious. And why is it was like 2 years ago, and I thought, why is it 2016 and you don't know? So could you find a man who could help me? And can we thank Dr. Beverly Tatum for coming up